retro YouTubers play a lot of games. Well, most of us do, and we don't talk about the other ones. And in doing so, we've learned some things. Others of us have also learned them via the one simple trick of being old. We're also guilty of assuming that you, the loyal viewer with a life and other hobbies and such, know what we know, referencing them in sneaky asides and in-joke copy. You need a cheat sheet. And so, let me present 7 things we assume you already know. For the vast majority of people watching, this is a game called Super Mario Bros. 2, the sequel to the original Super Mario Bros., although more on that in a minute. The thing is, it isn't. The reason this differs in gameplay so massively from other games in the series is no one knew they were writing a Mario game. It's 1986, and in the USA, the NES is still very new. In Europe and the UK, it's not even been released. The game Super Mario Bros. Is still selling like discounted hotcakes. But in Japan, the Famicom is 3 years old and it's sequel time. That sequel appeared in June and is effectively a level pack of much harder levels than were in the original. If you're thinking it looks familiar, then yeah, because it looks like Super Mario Bros. 1. But you might also know it eventually re-released in Western countries under the possibly more honest name of Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. Meanwhile in Japan, Kensuke Tanabe, who is involved in almost every Nintendo favourite you've ever had, was a rookie game designer working on his very first game. It was ambitious, with vertically scrolling levels designed for 2-player cooperative gameplay, and at least at the time, Tanabe-san could not get it to work right or be a decent coherent game for one player. Then, one of those moments. He recalled being called over to Fuji Television on behalf of Nintendo, where he was told of his next project, a game based on Fuji's upcoming technology festival, Yume Kojo. And by told of his next project, he remembers being handed a sheet of character art and being told in so many words, make a game with this. He did, and if you see Doki Doki Panic, it's immediately familiar with the slightly weird gameplay quirks we've come to know in what we thought was the first Mario sequel. It's reasonably obscure even in Japan as something to own, appearing only on the slightly unloved disc-based add-on for the system. Nintendo of America came sniffing for a sequel about a year later, but they didn't want Super Mario Bros. 2 because it was too similar to the original, something games companies would certainly grow out of. It was Nintendo USA's president, Minoru Arakawa, who asked for Doki Doki Panic. It wasn't an absurd request, Nintendo had done something similar before, which gives me a chance to sneak in the second thing we think you already know. Donkey Kong, Mario's debut game, was supposed to star popular old-time cartoon character Popeye, but they couldn't get the license. If you realise Kong himself was supposed to be Bluto, it makes a lot of sense. Nintendo would finally get the license a couple of years later, releasing an arcade game that might provide clues as to how some of the graphics may have looked. In the alternate universe, they got their act together in time for Donkey Kong. Back with Mario though, they went ahead with Arakawa's idea, giving us the Super Mario Bros. 2 we know and love in 1988. It worked. Super Mario Bros. 2 is the 4th best-selling NES game ever, and if you exclude games that were distributed with the hardware itself at one point or another, it's number 1. And if that didn't justify it being considered a proper Mario game, consider some things inherent to Mario today as a series. Peach and Toad are playable characters here for the first time, for instance, although you could argue they might have thought of that one later anyway. This, though, is the first time Luigi is pictured having a stature any different to Mario. His taller frame is now considered canon, but it first appears here. And given that innovation in gameplay has been a hallmark of Mario ever since, from the suits in 3, the change to 3D in 64, and whatever the hell is going on in 90% of Super Mario Wonder, then there's no reason not to consider Super Mario Bros. 2 a perfectly viable entry in the series, even if it's not, technically, Super Mario Bros. 2. Which brings us to number 3, because I called Super Mario Bros. 2 the first sequel. It of course isn't. But the actual point I want to make is, what do you think this guy is called? A good proportion of you normal people just said Super Mario, and you must immediately go to the naughty corner and think about what you've done. You'll be joining half the universe, to be fair. That's how he seems to get referred to whenever video games come up in normal people media. The reason for the confusion is understandable. The series is called Super Mario Bros. After all, but that's because of this game, simply called Mario Bros., a two-player single-screen arcade game. Super Mario Bros. Was called that because it was the sequel, and the huge success of that first home-focused entry cemented it as the name of the series in general. Mario Brothers might also give you pause. Shouldn't that then be a surname? Yes, it should. Mario is Mario's surname. And his first name. He's Mario according to Nintendo, and Luigi's name is Luigi Mario. This is admittedly the subject of some debate. While Nintendo and series creator Shigeru Miyamoto now accept this as true, they didn't for a long time. As late as 2012, the late Nintendo CEO Satoru Iwata and Miyamoto both stated Mario had no last name, before changing their mind around the 30th anniversary. It didn't come out of thin air though. It was used in the 1993 live-action film and in multiple games long before that. And the 2012 denial above came after the character's then voice actor Charles Martinet made the claim. Neither is it his original name. Mario Bros. Is not his first appearance. That, as you've probably worked out, was Donkey Kong, where in the Japanese version at least, he's known simply as Jumpman. At the time, Nintendo's American office was rented from a company called M.A. Segale, and funds were very tight. Behind on rent, the company's owner came to yell at them about it, and partially in thanks for being given time to come up with the money, the in-development character was named after Segale, where the M was, of course, Mario. By all reports, Segale had a sense of humour about it, and the name first appears in the sales brochure for Donkey Kong, where he's called Little Mario. Beats Miyamoto's first idea, mind. Mario was originally going to be called Mr. Video. The fourth thing you should know is, Nintendo isn't a video game company. Okay, so obviously that's the clickbait version. They made quite a few video games, otherwise they probably wouldn't be in this video. But they didn't used to, and it's not why they exist. Nintendo are old. They were founded in 1889, and obviously they needed to pass the time while they waited around for someone to invent video games. And come to think of it, the television to play them on. Their original purpose was producing cards to play the popular Japanese games of Hachi Hachi and Koi Koi. These cards are known as Hanafuda, or flower cards, and they can be absolutely lovely, as you can see from my set here. These games were especially popular in a Japan that had recently banned gambling. The change starts to come in 1933, with the appointment of the founder's son-in-law. After card sales fell during World War II and the company was only kept afloat by money from the family of his grandson, Sekiro handed over the reins to said grandson Hiroshi Yamauchi in 1949. That's a name you might well have heard of, especially if you caught the recent Tetris dramatisation. Hiroshi, the great-grandson of the founder, set about modernising, first formalising the name as Nintendo Playing Card Company, but also expanding from more traditional cards to mass production of modern-style plastic-coated efforts, and even signing a deal with Disney to brand some of them. But it was a visit to the US that changed things for Nintendo. Hiroshi had travelled mainly to visit the facilities of the United States Playing Card Company, possibly better known to you as Bicycle. What he discovered was the single biggest company in the business was still small. He wasn't wrong. Their revenue is currently somewhere around $60 million a year. So to grow, as Hiroshi wanted, Nintendo needed to diversify, and taking advantage of the distribution into toy stores offered by the playing card business, they started looking at games, establishing an R&D department employing, among other people, Gunpei Yoki, later credited as inventor of the Game Boy. Ultimately, Yokoi's focus on electrics took over. They'd produced an electronic gun toy before the 60s were out. They designed the light gun for the first commercial video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1972, and then 5 years later their own first console. Not the Famicom, that was years off. The Color TV game, which, obeying the laws of all 1970s games consoles, was available in orange. From here they never looked back, and I've skipped over so much of the history and interesting products you'll want to look into it yourself, just to find out if I'm kidding about them making both a love tester and something called the Handy Game. On the video game side though, the handheld Game & Watch came along in 1980, the Famicom in 1983, the Game Boy in 1989, and Legend status was fully achieved. The thing is though, Nintendo still isn't a video game company, not exclusively. Whether it be part of the Japanese interest in tradition, sentimentality from Hiroshi's successors, or that they like money, I don't know. But remember those Hanafuda cards I showed you? Guess who made them? Guess who still makes them? They don't officially sell them in the UK, but you can get a set on eBay sent to the UK for entirely reasonable money. I highly recommend doing so. And if you thought you didn't know Nintendo's history, what if I told you Sega is American? No, really. Again, this is one where we're going to need to skip over a lot of detail in a video like this. But what you know as Sega traces its origins right back to an American businessman called Irving Bromberg, who made gambling machines from his base in New York. This group was expanded with the founding of Standard Games to handle distributing such things in the west of the country, in a time logistics were difficult enough that was a thing. Unlike Nintendo, these companies did very well during World War II, selling machines to the military for use during the leisure time of the soldiers. After the war, the US Army wanted rid of the machines, and eventually the group consolidated to a single company to handle this: Service Games, which is where the modern Sega gets its name. Which is interesting in itself. You see people who are terminally online arguing between Sega and Sega for pronunciation. If anything, it should surely be Sega. The Japanese business we know today comes in 1952 or so. A 1951 US law had outlawed slot machines, and so Service Games of Japan was established. This still isn't Sega as such. In the wake of some exciting legal cases over bribery and tax evasion that are chronicled much better elsewhere, Service Games of Japan was closed down in 1960. 3 days later, 2 new companies were formed by totally not the same people. I don't know why you'd even think that. Nihon Goraku Busan and Nihon Kekai Saizo. The latter of which would be known publicly, in an almost comically unsubtle fashion, as Sega Inc. This was especially unconvincing since Service Games have been using the modern abbreviated name on machines for over half a decade. These companies bought the assets of the old company and ultimately merged 4 years later. The only other thing to clear up is the name Sega Enterprises, which you'll have seen on all your 80s and 90s games. This is the Americans again. David Rosen, a US military officer, had founded Rosen Enterprises in the mid-50s to make photo booths and expanded into coin-operated amusements. He sold his company to Sega in 1965 to create, broadly, the company we know and love today. It's Rosen who stayed with the company longest. While the rest of the founders largely got out in 1969, selling up to Gulf and Western of all people, Rosen remained with Sega, ultimately as chairman of Sega of America, right up until 1996. And speaking of Sega, what do you call this? My channel metrics suggest that a healthy majority of you said Mega Drive, but at least 15% of you just said Genesis. And there are 2 of you thinking, what the hell did that guy just call the Super Aladdin Boy? This is a nice easy one to sort out, despite what a few bullies have forced Wikipedia to say, the machine should obviously primarily be known as Mega Drive. It was designed in Japan as the Mega Drive, released there first, and is known as the Mega Drive in the vast majority of the world. That American name is the reason these entries are in this order, because the name Genesis is the fault of our old friend David Rosen. The Mark III and Master System, the 2 near identical machines that preceded it, were the generational victors in the UK, Europe, Australia, and notably Brazil, where, final fact, they are still sold as of 2025. At this point, close to half of all Master System machines have been manufactured by Brazil distributor Tectoy. None of this success happened in the USA, where the machine was dead quick enough they only got 1 of the 6 Sonic Universe games released for the machine. And so Rosen, who didn't like Mega Drive in the first place, suggested Genesis to represent a new beginning that also involved taking distribution away from their partner Tonka and establishing their own infrastructure to do so. Elsewhere, they still had partners. In the UK, Sega had bought distributors Mastertronic, but Tectoy handled Brazil, as they still do, and in Korea, it was Samsung who rebranded it to appeal to their local consumer base as the Super Game Boy, and then later, presumably because of the obvious problems with that name, Super Aladdin Boy. So there we go. Super Mario Bros. 2 is Doki Doki Panic. This guy is called Mario Mario. Nintendo are a playing card company, Sega is American, this is a Mega Drive, but don't begrudge the Americans calling it a Genesis, and 40 years after its initial introduction, you can still buy a new Sega Master System. I hope a lot of videos make more sense now, and if you want longer versions of some of this history, subscribe to this channel, where every month we take a deep dive into an issue of a video game magazine, playing the games, examining the stories, and making exactly one your mum joke. Those, I'm afraid, I cannot explain. Good night, everybody.